And it's quite uncanny that during the week I was actually looking and referring to Esther and to Mordecai and to what happens there. And the key verse obviously would be the verse that Mordecai says to Esther. And what was that key verse?
You would know that if you can't put a time like this, you're putting in a position of catastrophe.
That's correct. It's where Mordecai told Esther that your purpose, your function was for this time. And what we're going to look at is how do we fit into that? You know, why are you born at this particular time? Why weren't you? Some people say, oh, I wish I could have been born in the 1800s, and others, oh, I wish I could have been born in the 1600s. But you're not. You're born in our time. Why? And I think that we need to understand that you too, just like Esther, were put here for a purpose. And we're going to be touching certain things like that. Now, of course, you have to read certain scriptures. One of them, well, some of them you have to read was particularly out of the book of Daniel. Otherwise, the balance was out of the book of Esther to try and give us a chronological order of what happened there. Our memory text is taken out of Isaiah chapter 49, verse 6. And I'm going to read it out of the New International. And it's a beautiful verse. One that we are going to be breaking up a little bit. It says there, Isaiah 49 verse 6, I'm sure that's correct. He says, it is too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. Now, so let me just ask off the cuff here. What would be your main objective on planet Earth today? Just if you look at that verse, that memory text, what's your main objective? If you look at Esther, although she was the queen, although she lived an interesting life, what was her main purpose? What is your main purpose?
Her main purpose was to save the Jews.
Well, it's true in Esther's story, the main purpose is to save the Jews, but I don't think that's our purpose. Trish? To live a godly life? Yes.
As an example to others?
Well, remember that in the lesson we are studying the purpose of mission. And so to live godly lives, that's maybe almost an individual purpose, but we're looking at mission. How do I fit into mission?
Take the gospel and salvation to the ends of the earth, to all nations.
Okay, now that's interesting. That is the objective. But I'm asking you, if you look at this particular verse, and I see them only concentrated in the last part, where it says there, I will make you a light for the Gentiles. So let's have a look at that first of all, before we even get into the story of Mordecai and see how we can actually get it out. What does it mean that you'll be the light to the Gentiles?
To the non-believers.
Pardon?
To the non-believers.
Yeah, okay, so non-believers, I need more than that. You know, how are you the light? Won't you please go with me to John chapter 1? And it's very interesting that when you read John chapter 1 and you look at the purpose of John, when you listen to his discussion, I want you to look at John chapter 1, and we're going to just read what he says there. First of all, in reference to himself, and I want you to notice this, I'm using this for a purpose. It's almost giving you the answer that I'm looking for, but because now we're looking at an individual, and the individual is John. Now, without question, we know the story of John. He is actually brought into the picture when he's not even born yet. Elizabeth, his mother, is counseled by an angel that John wasn't just going to be a Joe Soap living in society. He was called for a purpose. What was his purpose?
To protect the
Either
way.
way.
To prepare the way for who?
Messiah.
For Christ. His main function was to draw people's attention to the Messiah. That's his main purpose. Now it's quite uncanny, but you wonder to yourself, they never met. They were kind of separated from one another, and yet they were cousins. But the one ends up in the desert. He's isolated. He eats honey and he's wearing sackcloth. In a sense, indicating that he is a prophet. Kind of the dress code of a servant of God. But he's in the desert most of his life. And every now and then he comes into the city of Jerusalem. For what purpose?
To teach. To tell people.
You see, the time wasn't right for him to come in yet. But when the time was right, he started with his ministry. He started baptizing. He started calling people to repentance. He started to fulfill his purpose. Remember, there was this argument amongst the disciples when they came and said, look at that man there that you baptize, he's baptizing people too now. And what is John's response to that? That he came for the purpose of revealing that, and he must become more, and John was to what now? Become less. You know, one of the most amazing, listen to what I'm telling you here. So many times we go to people and we introduce them to Christ like John would do, but then instead of leaving them with Christ, we start taking over. And so I want you to look at something. My question was, how does our role fit in to how are we the lights to the Gentiles? Now it's already the Gentile, the concept of Gentile means unbeliever, or somebody who doesn't believe the same way that you. So it doesn't mean a non-religious person. But it's a person primarily who does not believe what?
In Jesus and
Does not believe in Jesus. Primarily. So let's just have a look at it. John says very clearly, when he speaks to them, he says in verse 23 of John chapter 1, John replied, in the words of Isaiah the prophet. It's amazing that we have reference to Isaiah. In the words of Isaiah, I am the voice of one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way for the Lord. Now I'm going to ask you this, what is your function?
make straight the way for the Lord.
Making straight the way. So please help me to understand that. You come to somebody who does not know the Lord. What's the problem in most cases? So let's have a look at here. Let's get into the story. Mordecai tells Esther, you are not to reveal your nationality. That you're a Jew. Even Mordecai, to a great extent, was an undercover Jew. Because the time wasn't right for him to be exposed. For her to be exposed. And you kind of wonder, why did Mordecai bring it out? Shouldn't we stand out boldly and all kinds of things? And so when I think of our role, our function as God's children, sometimes I think we hit the iron before it's hot. Sometimes I think we scratch where there is no itch. And I'm feeling here, when I look at this, that, so let me just carry on there. It's interesting that when you read also concerning John's testimony, he goes on to speak about the fact that we have been called, we are not people of darkness, but people of what?
Light.
So what does that mean? When it says you're not people of darkness, does it mean you're not living in the dark? And you're now in the light? Or what does it mean to be in darkness?
Well, Jesus is the light of the world, so to be to know Jesus.
Okay, but no, that's not quite the answer I'm looking for.
You're not in the light of God, maybe.
No, so let's just imagine. The world is in darkness, but you're not in darkness, are you? What's it mean not to be in darkness? Explain that to
In
me.
the light of God.
Not to be ignorant of.
Yes.
I think as Christians, when it says that, it means that we, knowing the word, we are not like in darkness, not knowing the word itself. So, in a way, we should be the light, and the world must see that we know.
Okay, so I like the idea that you've now changed the word light and darkness to actually being informed and not informed. Knowing and not knowing. You understand? When it came to the COVID, how many of us were in the darkness? All of us were in the darkness as to what happened. We're still speculating what happened. Conspiracy theories come out like anything.
Yeah.
But if you knew what was going on, you're not in darkness anymore, you're in the light. Yes, Paul.
I'm struggling with it being about knowledge and knowing. The Jews knew much, but they didn't have light. Light is understanding, not knowledge.
Okay, I like that. There are certain verses that we could use to kind of bring out the value of knowledge. You know, the beginning of wisdom is knowledge. But knowledge of who? You see, the word says, John 17 verse 3, this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God. So let's look at it. If I claim to be out of darkness, what am I saying to you? Now, I'm not talking, if we had to just talk without the word being in the picture, and somebody comes to me and says, listen, there's something wrong with my vehicle, I don't know what's going on, they are in the dark regarding the functioning of the vehicle. But they come to me because I claim to be a mechanic, and I then show them or bring to them light. Oh, the problem with your vehicle is you haven't got fuel in it. You understand? You've run out of petrol. Or something like it, but you are imparting light. But here we see that you are going to be a light to the Gentiles. Now, so many times we think that that light is about health reform. You know, we've got all of Ellen White's books, even on family life. And we feel we need to talk about that. But what did the Jewish nation have that they did not impart? It comes out in the lesson. They had a knowledge of the Messiah and what would happen. But when he came, according to John 1, he came to his own and his own did not receive him. His own did not recognize him. What was the problem? They claimed to have a knowledge, but their knowledge was darkness. And the Bible warns us how dark is that darkness. So let me come back now. We claim that we want to be lights to the world. I'm going to bring this out when we talk about Mordecai. But it's not, it's actually reflecting the light that you know. You all answered quite correctly that Jesus says, I am the light of the world. So when you go to a Gentile, you are not revealing your information, but you are revealing that you have a knowledge of who? Of Jesus Christ. Now, please explain that a little bit more. Now, in the worship hour, we're going to be highlighting something because I think sometimes we tend to not realize the danger of the time that we're living in because of our being misinformed regarding certain things. What do you need to know in order to be the light of the world? A light to the world. You know, what did you need to know before you could become the light of the world? You needed to know Christ. Somebody had to introduce you to Christ. Somebody had to tell you who Christ was. Somebody had to tell you why. What was his purpose? When you receive that knowledge, you become enlightened. What's your function now? To become that instrument to take light to the unenlightened. But not just about the events of the world, but about Christ. I'm going to expand on this. Let me ask you this question. Here's Paul on the road to Damascus. He claimed to know God, didn't he? He spoke about his knowledge of the word. Boasted about it. But then he's knocked off his horse and a voice from heaven says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? What's his question? Who are you, Lord? You know, so many people, and now the interesting thing here, The Lord that he uses there, in a sense, would be Yahweh. But then what is the voice response? I am Jesus who you are persecuting. What's the shocker here?
Pastor, in the beginning when I became a Christian, I also asked the question, who was Jesus? Jesus, what has you got to do with my life? I asked the question, and God revealed it to me, so I understand a little bit of that. Like, I'm spirit. I always express Jesus.
You know, our greatest problem in the world is that people do not know Jesus. Our biggest problem. And yet, we can't know him. Now, if you do know Christ, now let's come back to this question I asked. When you come to a Gentile, I think of Paul's words in Ephesians where he said, once upon a time, you also were a Gentile. A person who did not have a knowledge of Christ. Once upon a time, you were there. Now you come into somebody who you were once upon a time. What made you different from that experience that you once upon a time were?
The relationship with Jesus.
You found out about Jesus. Now let me just go on further. A lot of people, when it comes to Christ, when you talk about Gentiles, and you even think of the words of Paul in Romans where he says that the Israelites had a zeal, but their zeal was without knowledge. If you think of Saul, he was persecuting people of the way. A zeal without knowledge. You look at the world, there's a lot of people doing things, but it's almost like they are uninformed. So I personally believe that the people don't know Jesus. Now, to me, this is crucial. Yes, Paul.
Some might think I'm splitting hairs, but there's knowing Jesus and there's knowing Jesus. Having a knowledge of Jesus here is not knowing Jesus. The whole world knows Jesus. There are 2 billion Catholics, they know Jesus. There's 1.5 billion Muslims, they know Jesus. There are 1 billion Shintos, Buddhists, they know Jesus. Confucianists, Taoists. But the knowledge of Jesus leads to a relationship, and the relationship
But
is
now you're doing what I'm asking. If it is a fact that everybody knows about Jesus, then Christ can come and fetch us. But the problem is that the information they have regarding Christ is not what it's all about. I mean, I'm speaking to you because let's come back to Mordecai. It's interesting, where do they find themselves first of all? Mordecai and Esther. And that was one of the things that really, it came out twice in the lesson. In the beginning, in the introduction, it mentioned something that was kind of, I was asking myself the question. Where do we find Mordecai and Esther? In the story, where do we find them? We find them in the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, is it in the beginning of the Medo-Persian Empire or is it a little bit way down? So it's a little bit way down. Has the decree of Artaxerxes already gone out? Have people already returned back to Jerusalem? There was this offer for people to go back. You can go back. We'll give you stuff to help you to go back. Go and build the walls. Now we find Esther and Mordecai still in Medo-Persia. What are they doing there? They're carrying on as if they didn't have a desire to go back to Israel, to Jerusalem. They didn't have a desire. Thank you. They didn't have a desire. Let's look at Esther. Was she the queen of the king of Persia? Somehow she falls out of favor with him. And his counselors come to him and say, it's time for you to get a new wife. Look for all the maidens. Esther is chosen to come along. Now, really, what do we see here that's strange? How come Esther was chosen?
For her beauty and being a virgin.
Pardon?
She was chosen for her beauty.
She was passing herself off as a Persian.
She was revealing herself to be a Persian. Now that's already a little strange, isn't it? Is that honest or dishonest? And yet Mordecai gave her that instruction. Now, in a sense, she gets married to this king. He has no clue of her nationality. I want you just to listen to this. No, that hasn't got an idea that she's actually Jew. All of a sudden a crisis develops. What's the crisis?
They're going to kill all the Jews.
One person doesn't like the Jews because Mordecai refuses to do something. He refuses to bow down to somebody who's now been lifted or elevated as, in a sense, a God on earth. Now, already, why is he not doing it?
Because he only bows down to God.
Because he's a Jew.
Yes.
Now, for the first time, they ask him, why aren't you doing it? If you were a normal Persian citizen, sorry, you would do that. So what does he reveal? He says, I'm a Jew. And my reasons for not bowing down is because we do not worship other gods. And in some sense, he didn't like the person. It was a little bit of a vendetta. What was also brought out in the lesson? This person that he had to bow down and worship, it was somebody that God distinctly told them was an enemy of the Jewish nation. You understand? So that was one of the reasons too. But for the first time, there is this revelation of who Mordecai really is. He's a Jew. So there's this attack on the Jews straight away to try and get rid of all the Jews. Now what do you need?
A miracle.
Well, you need a miracle, and we're going to touch something because it's actually quite incredible. What was the law of the Medes and Persians?
Cannot be changed.
What do you mean, what cannot be changed?
Once the king had ratified it, sealed it, that law stood no matter what. And
Not even the king could change it.
Couldn't change it.
Okay, so what did the king decree when he was approached? Go wipe out all the Jews. He decreed it. He can't undecree it. I want you to remember this now. He can't undecree it.
Hamas would go crazy.
But they cooked him into doing it.
No. Even if we say that, whatever, if you think of the story of Daniel and how that the king was also deceived into saying if anybody worships anybody else, you can throw in the lion's den. It's true.
But Mordecai...
But still it was a decree in writing. I want you just to listen. What I'm showing you here is that there is something more going on than just what we're looking at. Here's Mordecai. He refuses to bow the knee. A decree is sent out. Wipe all those people who don't want to be proper citizens of the Medo-Persian Empire. But then what does Mordecai do?
Dressed in sackcloth.
He goes to Esther. And what's he say to Esther? You need to reveal that you are a Jew. Why does she need to reveal that she's a Jew? Because she had to represent the Jews now in the highest position that you could ever get to. So I want you just to see this. Somehow out of all of this, we look at things and say, oh, that's not honest. You know, and we look at it. But sometimes we have to play roles where people don't know. Many times when I'm involved in a discussion with people, I don't jump out and say to them, I'm Seventh-day Adventist. Because some people, the moment they hear Seventh-day Adventists, there is prejudice that goes up like anything. You can never reach them. Christ has an experience. I wanted to ask you this. Remember, he's on top of the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John are with him up there on the mountain. Peter says, oh, we need to build some houses for you, and Moses and Elijah. And next minute, poof, everything's gone. What does Jesus tell them?
Don't tell anyone.
Don't tell anyone what you've seen. Until when?
Until I come back.
Until the proper time. You see, dear friends, there is a proper time to speak. I'm going to be elaborating on that. But here, because that was the words of Mordecai. You have been born and placed in this place for this occasion. There is a time. So let's come back again to our reaching the Gentile. I look at it sometimes and I think that we are out of timing when it does come to reaching the Gentiles. We're trying to tell them things that they're not really interested in. We try to give them Christ when they don't even acknowledge His authority, His role. When will the proper time be? You know, when I look around me, okay, is that cool? Listen to what I'm asking. I ask the question, when is it the proper time to stand up and speak? To reveal that you are now a Jew. When is the proper time?
There's our time and there's God's time. And don't speak to people about Christ in our time. Do it in God's time.
But I'm asking, how do you know when it's God's time? Because you see, the lesson study, the whole objective of the lesson study is to get us to go out to the people. And we rush out because we're told to do it. But the timing's out.
Because we aren't prepared.
Okay, yes, in some sense, but I don't always give away the answer. Listen to the words of Mordecai to Esther. No, that's not quite it. When was the crisis? I mean, was there any...
Are you talking about Passover and Purim?
I'm talking about Esther and when she finally steps forward. I mean, she was already married to the king for quite a few years. Loved by the king. Made the queen. But also she steps forward. Why does she step forward?
I'm just trying to think when is the best time to speak.
Yes, when's the best time?
When need arise.
Pardon?
When need arise, I should speak. Because sometimes, like, we look at this story for Esther, and now they wanted to kill the Jews. And Mordecai is talking now. There was time for her to reveal the purpose why she was there. And should she have said it, perhaps the story was going to be different. So there was need for her, for Mordecai now to ask Esther.
So what did she all of a sudden do that we just read in Isaiah? What did she all of a sudden do?
It was a last minute.
She opens up, she breaks the little container that she was hidden under, and she lets her light shine. Now you'll see what I'm talking about. A lot of things that are happening in the world at this moment, if you just think of what's happening in Israel and Palestine, it's part of biblical preparation. It's part of something that's really going on, and I wonder how many of you really realize that the majority of Christians, especially in America, are very focused on what's going on there. And their support towards Israel is overwhelming. Why? And then when will the proper time be? Because at this time, if people are going to be misinformed, I can assure you terrible disasters are going to come. If you think of Hitler, when Hitler came into his power, he was the most dangerous person ever, but nobody informed them of the danger. So the light wasn't shining. Don't tell me that people didn't know that there was something going on that was extremely dangerous. Things are happening around us. And you have been put on planet Earth for a purpose. To let your light shine when it's time to shine. Now we as Seventh-day Adventists love to boast about our knowledge that we have regarding end-time events. But I find that we are like the blind trying to speak to the blind. Jesus warns us that there's going to come a time when false messiahs will rise. I'm going to be highlighting certain things. But let's get just back here again. You cannot inform others if you are not informed. If I had to ask you here, what is the significance of Daniel 9:24-27? Now, one of the most amazing things, it's not a unique teaching to the Seventh-day Adventists, but it is a teaching that we hold favorably as ours. Hardly any other Christian organization even looks at the book of Daniel. But you know that there's a Christian organization at this moment that is focusing extremely on certain messianic prophecies, and they've taken them from historical narrative and have made them futuristic. Do you understand what I mean by that? Things that point to something that should have happened in the past, which did happen in the past, they say didn't happen, and therefore the fulfillment is going to be coming now. And part of that, Jerusalem's involved. So what I'm trying to say to you, you see, when we look at the story of Mordecai there, the light that I see that is revealed there was a light that wasn't necessary for any other time. It had to be revealed at that moment. And that's when she steps forward and she says, you see, I want to tell you, you have a message that is uniquely designed for end time. To prepare people for end time. But most of us are frightened about end time. And I want to come back to this concept of information. There is no other church organization that has such incredible insight into the prophecies of God's Word like the church has. But we focus on old things and we're not looking at what's happening around us. The war between Russia and Ukraine, or that just somehow just happened. Christ himself says there will be wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes, and it just happened. We are also counseled very clearly in the writings of Ellen White that the preparation for the Battle of Armageddon is in place. And the two main people who are playing major roles in this have got their strategic plans in place. Who are the two major roles? The devil and Christ. Do you know that Christ has a definite plan for the end? How it's going to finish? But so does the devil. And do you know that if you look at the planning, part of this whole thing of Mordecai is a revelation that there is something going to happen, a crisis that's going to happen. And the message you have is going to be the solution to the problem. You know, the Bible teaches me that we are, or here are the patience of the saints. Isn't that true? Here are they that keep the commandments of God and what else? Hold to the testimony of Jesus. Now, what is the testimony of Jesus? According to the Word of God, it's the spirit of prophecy. What does that mean? That we have a knowledge of prophecy. Not only are we commandment keepers, but we have a knowledge of prophecy. How can you be preparing the people for end time events when you have no clue that you are in end time? How could Esther stand up at that moment if she wasn't a Jew? And I'm saying to you that when I look at the Gentile, the difference between the Gentile and us as Christians should be, like Paul has been pushing out, we are informed. But you know, our focus is on the Pope. We have been diverted. It's a strategy that the devil uses all the time. But we should not be diverted. We should be clear. And I honestly believe that if there was a time that we should step out and go speak to the world, like Paul said, which is a fact, most of them don't have a problem when it comes to Jesus. They all acknowledge it. But you know, there's a serious problem with just acknowledging. Even though the Buddhists might acknowledge, even though Islam does recognize Jesus, even in the Quran. Even if the Christian has it in the Bible, when he came to his own did not recognize him. If Christ should come in the clouds of heaven, a lot of us will be taken by surprise. Because we think we're informed, but we're not. So, when I look at the lesson, and I look at the two stories that they brought out, about Daniel and about Esther, what was the most interesting thing is that they never lost vision of who they were and the timing of their roles. You are living in a world where you are going to have an incredible influence, I tell you, on the events of the world. Yes, Paul.
They always knew their true identity, and they knew their world identity, which was a little different because they were perceived as functioning Persians.
Persians, exactly. But they, by character, weren't. That's why Mordecai didn't bow down. But I want to just end off with this thought. When we talk about taking the gospel to the world, and we say the gospel is Christ, and that's quite true. What do we know? We need to know about Christ. And I want to just leave this thought with you. The book of Revelation, all the other books were written by particular authors. You would agree with me, isn't that true? The Gospels, John, Matthew, Isaiah, Jeremiah, written by people. Book of Revelation, although the scribe was John,
Special transmission.
it says in Revelation chapter 1, and I want to just show you this. It says in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, the revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servant what must soon take place. So who is the person that's revealing or giving the information? The Father. If there was a book that we need to study, it is the book of Revelation. It's the book of Revelation. So I want to come back. When I look at Mordecai and Esther, they fulfilled a very specific function in a particular period of time. You have been called with a very distinct message that sometimes we talk about it and we're too early. But it doesn't mean that you mustn't prepare. John the Baptist, for at least 30 years of his life, was the strange person eating honey and wearing sackcloth. But he was preparing to stand up and do one of the most important works ever, to prepare the people for Christ, for his first advent. We believe that Jesus is coming back. One of the most important things that we have to do is to prepare people for the coming. Now, before that coming comes, there is going to be a false coming. Most people, and even us as Seventh-day Adventists, aren't ready for it. Let's close our eyes. Father in heaven, there were certain questions that popped into my mind when I thought about Mordecai and Esther and how they had clothed their true identities. But what is amazing, Father in heaven, is that even in the whole book of Esther, your name isn't recorded once. And yet you were in full control. And when I think of the events on planet Earth as it unfolds, your name is not even mentioned once. But yet you are in full control. Please help us, Father, to see the truth. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.